Baked Bros presents the Know Your Dose podcast. Join hosts Nadeem Al-Hassan and Derek Espinosa as they turn the soil on the cannabis industry. With over 10 years of combined industry experience, these two experts will deliver your dose of cannabis, psychedelics, and personal development. Follow on their journey as they aim to destigmatize cannabis, combat the abuse of pharmaceuticals, and implement their altruistic approach into the budding cannabis industry.
Welcome to this episode, everybody. Derek and I are going to cover why is workplace culture in the cannabis industry notoriously bad? Well, I don't know. We're going to talk about it and you're going to find out. What are the most valuable places that we can improve? Holla, I know 3 that we talk about, which you'll have to stay tuned to hear about that. And it's not just going to help improve the cannabis workplace culture, but just any workplace culture, even if it's just you doing it for the work that you currently work for now. You know, it's going to improve your life. And then how has Bake Bros tried to implement these kinds of improvements, the 3 that we do mention? So I hope you enjoy this episode and let's go. Hey buddy, how was your weekend?
Oh man, it was good. It was relaxing. Got to spend some time with friends, particularly friends I haven't gotten to hang out with one-on-one in a while. So it was fantastic. How was yours?
It was really good, bud. I got to do the same. Not a lot of responsibilities, so that was a different feeling for sure. I was kind of checked out. This guy got confident in knowing his dose, so let's just say I slept in a little bit. Hey, so I want to talk about the workplace. You did an awesome write-up for MG Magazine on culture and cannabis, or the culture in the workplace in terms of cannabis industry. But let's first off kind of talk why the workplace culture in the cannabis industry is notoriously bad. Maybe people listening right now haven't heard that. Maybe they have. I don't know. I'd love to know. So reach out to us and let us know. But I know from being within the cannabis workplace that I hear this often, you know? And so what is it that makes this notoriously bad? And I'm doing air quotes right now.
So I think the first thing to understand is like, what are the outward manifestations that something's wrong, right? Because from people, especially consumers looking in, it's like, wow, cannabis is growing every year. Things must be really good. But for those of us inside the industry, there's a different narrative that we don't necessarily project outwardly, which is, like you alluded to, there's something wrong in the workplace. And the evidence for that comes from, at least in part, a 2019 report from Headset, which is a cannabis analytics firm. And they found that just 14% of cannabis employees make it through the first 3 months of employment. Now, right, that should be jarring for anybody listening. I mean, that is a huge turnover rate. And if you've worked inside a dispensary or worked in a cannabis company, I mean, you've seen this map on to reality. I mean, you've gone through, worked with dispensaries, Nadeem. How often is it that, you're having to deal with somebody new at a dispensary because they're constantly turning over?
Oh yeah, man. It's a very common problem. I would say, so what are some of the key positions within dispensaries? You have purchasing manager, inventory manager, you have the patient assistant, delivery drivers. I would say the most common turnaround I would see would be the patient assistants.
Mm-hmm.
I would see faces. I was taking deliveries in the early days every single day. Sometimes would hit dispensaries, 2-3 times in a matter of 2 weeks, and I would see new faces all the time, or I'd ask where somebody was, and they're no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say second behind that would be the inventory manager.
Mm-hmm.
That was another pretty common turnaround, and I think one of the reasons why for the inventory managers is that it's kind of like how you mentioned in your write up, like the workload is just colossal. Like it's more than what they really anticipated, and so it's like you're really you're really not going to make it unless you come from like a background of inventory. Like, let's say anybody who's done worked at a bar and you've done inventory on the bar lineup, you know what I mean. You've got hundreds of SKUs. But for the patient assistance, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that, because there's a lot of, well, there's not a lot of qualifications, and I think people have certain expectations of what they think it's going to be like to work in the cannabis industry, and then it's not what they thought it was.
Right. So, you typically, within any industry, you have entry level positions, right? Which require little to no experience. And that would be the position of somebody behind the counter. And then it's coming from somebody who, worked in that position for 3 years. And you have your traditional onboarding process, which is not consistent across the board. Some dispensaries take time and effort, like the one I came onto, in educating the patient assistants and going through product knowledge and cannabis knowledge. But that's not a gold standard. And then on top of that, you have, really young people coming into the workplace typically to fill those positions that don't have a ton of, outside of experience. And then the last piece, which is what you're saying, is typically the processes, the policies, the procedures that you would find in a regular standardized company are not there. Even the company that I worked for, which was pretty
Well established.
well established and structured well, things were constantly changing.
Right.
Shifts were changing. The way our work schedules were structured changed. Policies changed. And it's because, the regulatory framework for cannabis is constantly evolving. The market share is constantly evolving. This is a brand new industry, and with that comes some serious uncomfortable growth. And that's going to trickle down from the top all the way down, to the end result, which is the consumer experience with the bud tenders or the patient assistants.
Yeah, man, it makes me think immediately of the book Good to Great. Because it's like, well, how do you solve this problem? How do you solve this problem? And there's still so much more to talk about it, but it's getting the right people. Finding the right people for the right position, and well, how do you do that? And sometimes you can go through some extensive hiring processes in order to find the right person, which is what we've done at Bake Bros. Our CEO, former co-host Thomas, he spent a lot of time on our hiring process and getting that fine-tuned with another one of our team members. And anybody that's been through our hiring process knows what I'm talking about. It's not like a simple application. And really what drove that was people with their expectations that, hey man, I'm gonna, like, you put a job listing out on Indeed or Monster, and they're like, oh yeah, I would love to work for the cannabis industry. That'd be so awesome. Weed, I like to smoke weed. I like to be high. Yeah, that sounds like a perfect fit. No, wrong. And what would happen? I mean, it got into it got into hundreds of applications and countless no shows.
Well, So my question is, did you guys start there? Was that the starting process?
No, that was not the starting process, and but it was those pain points. It was those pain points that got us to get the processes in place that we have now.
Because we've already figured a lot of stuff out. I have seen the benefit of that, right? But there are a lot of companies that started out similar to us, or that are starting out right now similar to us, and they're experiencing a lot of these problems. And so I wanna diagnose that problem. Like, where did that come from? Why was it so difficult in the beginning?
Well, man, it's really what it was in the early days, because I say the early days like I'm old, but in 2010 to 2000, let's say 2000, because 2014 was when Bake Bros went to High Times. 2015 was when we became an established business within the dispensaries. And well, to be honest, man, like, we didn't have the business acumen. Like we were young. I'm going to be 30 this year. I was 23, 24 at the time, and I had no degree in business and marketing and distribution and organizations, none of that, man, none of that. And neither for Thomas either. And he's definitely more savvy in terms of business. So he's been the driver for that, which has been fantastic and really helpful, because it's motivated a lot of other people on the team to be the same. But really, to answer that question is, we just didn't have the business acumen, man. And we were in a market where it's coming from a black market. Like, fortunately, we operated in what would be called as a gray area at the time, because we were licensed patients. We had we were operating within the guidelines that the AMMA had written, but still, it's like, it's not like I could go on Shark Tank and pitch this idea, like,
especially in 2013 to
yeah,
2015.
yeah, man. And it's like, I remember, and after Thomas and I had because Bake Roast became a real thing in like April of 2014, and then a real business with an LLC, a little bit later on. But if I would have, or I not would have, I did, I reached out to family, asking for investment loans, however, whatever that, I didn't even know how the hell to structure a loan, bro. Like, I wouldn't have even known, but I'm asking, and everybody said no. There was curiosity around it, and it's not like we were asking for a lot, maybe 50, 60,000, and nobody wanted to, and now it's like the tables have turned. People are dying to get involved, and it's like, hey, like, we just don't need that right now. Like,
Right.
we haven't. We've been forced to deal with the hard pain points and learn, and those hard pain points from us learning got us to where we are now.
Right. So what's interesting in there is this transition from, some come from a black market to the gray market. Some came from the black market to the legal market. Some came, like us, from the gray market to the legal market. But I think few came just straight into the legal market. And so I think, if we're looking at the industry as a whole, we could probably agree that most of the people who started cannabis companies, especially early on, were inexperienced in business acumen for a variety of reasons. I would imagine that they were more, the demographic was probably younger than older, because the reality is that most business professionals who were experienced and seasoned, which takes time, were looking at the cannabis market in the early days. Again, we're talking 2010 to 2015. And still today, there's a lot of skepticism around the industry. It hasn't fully been built. It's not all the way done. And
Right.
so, obviously people who are risk takers are going to jump in first. And if you're in the black market, you're already a risk taker. What's the harm in jumping, to the next thing? If you're young, your frontal cortex isn't fully developed. You're like, hey, let's try this out. And some people won and some people lost. But the reality is that the majority of people who won did not have the experience to really build to scale what was required to create a massive company. I mean, look at MedMen. Right.
Right. Well, we saw that in the early days too. Between 2012 and maybe 13. The first round of lottery tickets or licenses was allotted in 2010, and I want to say by like 2013, or I think it was like August of 2013. The state had basically said, "Hey, if you guys don't get your doors open, like, we're gonna reissue these lotteries and you're SOL."
Right.
Because I think it's partly due to, in alignment with what you're talking about, is like, these people that were early in the market that had the means, to get the license, got the licenses, but didn't know how to operate a business to that scale, and we saw it happen, and so more licenses were issued, or they were reissued, and now here we are today, pushing over, I think like over 110 brick and mortar dispensaries, and possibly about to be rec. So it's definitely grown, man. It's been cool though, with Bake Bros though, like, in terms of culture. I mean, we're a startup company. Like we're a true startup company. We don't have big money backing us or big conglomerates or anything like that. Like and we're up against them. Like
Right.
it's kind of cool, man. I mean, it's not just Thomas and I. It's the like I would say mostly all the team, most all the team. And if I say most all, because there may be some that I haven't got to hang out with or talk to.
Right.
I mean, COVID's made it difficult. But that's Thomas and I's. That's our culture and our values as just who we are, the underdogs, right?
Right.
And I think what's key for a lot of startups is that underdog mentality, right? I mean, if I was born, or if he was born, if we were born with silver spoons in our mouths, it, who knows? I could name drop some people right now, but I'm not trying to do that. And it's like we had to work for what we had.
Right.
I was fortunate enough to get a job to be able to buy my own toothpaste and buy my own socks and buy my own underwear and buy my own stuff. My parents could afford it, but they made me do it. And it's like I'm thankful for that, man, because that again that is a part of the startup mentality, which is really important for where we're about to lead this conversation, and that's culture.
Right. So one of the things I think is really important there is that, like you said earlier, you didn't start off, you and Thomas didn't start off perfect, right? There was a lot of learning that needed to take place.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the core competencies that you had was you guys were nimble learners. You
Mm-hmm.
were constantly able to take feedback, whether it was given verbally or just situationally, like, oh, this isn't working, and continue to improve along the way until you created a culture that was sustainable, that could, scale. And so, one of the problems with startup cultures in general, though, is that they often they're very difficult to get into. Mark Randolph did a great job detailing this in his book on the creation of Netflix, which is like there's just a lot of stress, there's a lot of work, and not everybody can handle that. And so that's another cup of water to the already overflowing pot of what makes this workplace insanely difficult. And so yeah, let's transition to the things that can really help people inside the work culture, and then how we've kind of implemented some of those in Bake Bros.
Yeah, man. To close, to just to add one more thing on the startup companies, which will lead into with the workplace at Bake Bros, and like what's most valuable. It's like, dude, it's yes, it's team management. It's management once you get into the nitty gritty of it. Like, or here, let me back up. It's management, having the right people in place, having the right management whenever you have more employees in place. But really, the foundation of it, the root of it, is back to backtrack a little bit on what you said about nimble learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being able to take those conversations, those crucial conversations. I'm speaking on behalf of Thomas and I in the early days. I'm talking 2015, 16, when, guys, I'd be lying to you if I said we weren't at each other's throats sometimes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because we were not emotionally intelligent enough to deal with each other. We were not business savvy enough to deal with each other. We had different philosophies, we had different ways of thinking, different ways of viewing things, not understanding, not knowing each other's role, not knowing our own role. Then as that progresses, then you deal with imposter syndrome and thinking that you're not good enough, or that maybe there's a sense of competing with each other, and it's like all of those conversations have to be had. And it's like, no, I'm not competing with you. Oh, well, I thought you were. Well, I'm not competing with you either. Oh, well, that's awesome. Like, why do we feel this way? Let's figure that out. Oh, well, this is why I feel that way. It's like, oh, well, you know what? That's probably not my area. And yeah, you should probably do that. That's definitely makes a lot more sense, right? Without those conversations, man, any startup, man, it's just going to be, it's going to be difficult. I don't care if you have a partner involved, or if you're working at home during quarantine time and you're going to create a drop shipping t-shirt company. Like those types of conversations are going to go a long way. So what's been most what are the most valuable places we can improve within the culture, right? Are we
Mm-hmm.
speaking on behalf of Bake Bros, or just in general the cannabis culture as a whole? Because the cannabis culture in the cannabis industry is a little different than Bake Bros culture within our company. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I would agree with that. So I think that the way I'm imagining this laying out is I will kind of give, the overview, and we can discuss a little bit the pillars that I think are important. And I think that we've instilled those pillars at Bake Bros, but I think that overall in terms of the industry, they're lacking. And so we can talk about those pillars, and then we can end it with how we've translated that into Bake Bros.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we could do that per pillar. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be we go through all the pillars and then switch over.
Yeah.
You down
Well,
with that?
yeah, could I kick it off with one that just stuck out so hard on the write up that you did?
Yes, please.
Yeah, meaning, man,
Mm,
having meaning in the work that you're doing, right? It makes me think of, oh God, Thomas is gonna kick me in the head if I butcher this, but I'm pretty sure it was JFK when he got invited to visit NASA, and he saw a gentleman sweeping or mopping, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing here? Like, what do you do here?" And the janitor said to JFK, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And it's like that's meaning, right? Because he's a janitor. That's what
right.
he's. That's
That's
what he
powerful.
got. That's what he got hired to do, is to sweep and mop and keep everything clean. But no, the meaning behind his work, which I would beckon comes from good leadership, right, and a good hiring process and everything. The leadership team made that individual, that employee, feel like, no, the purpose of you being here is because you're helping put a man on the moon. You're helping keep this place clean, keep people happy, so that everybody else can perform at their highest, right? And if everybody in the group can operate like that, man, I'd beckon that if 80% of the people in the group could operate like that, the other 20% would have no choice but to coach up or coach out.
Mhm.
Like,
Well, within any system, you find that 10% of the participants are giving you 90% of the results that you're looking for. And if you can expand that group of 10% to 20% to 30%, I mean, how much more are you able to do? You know what I mean? Um,
yeah.
what's interesting is when I was writing this, I was reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And
Mm,
for those who don't know, he wrote this book in part as a reflection of his experience inside concentration camps during the
man.
Holocaust, because him and his family were all imprisoned. And he ended up losing every member of his family. And he came out and wrote these experiences. And what he talked about in that book was that the people who survived the concentration camps weren't the youngest, weren't the healthiest, weren't X, Y, or Z. It was the people who were able to keep meaning instilled in their heart and mind. He noticed that as soon as someone lost their meaning, whatever that was to them, they almost withered away and died. And
Well,
so I mean, and he was influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche, who I quote here in this article, and he said, "Who has a why to live can bear almost any how." So that janitor, right? He's not looking at it like I'm just mopping and sweeping and picking up other people's trash, and my life sucks. Boy, I wish I had something else. He's like, no, I'm helping put a man on the moon. I am just
exactly.
as important as the scientist, as the astronaut. Each piece is integral to the whole. And that's what we're trying to, get people to instill in their organization. Um, I'm just
You,
gonna
you,
go ahead.
so well, I love it. If that's not just culture, though, that's just not the workplace, that's life,
It
right?
is life.
Having meaning in the work that you do. I'll speak, when I was overseas, in Japan for a little while. It's like I saw a lot of the senior citizens very active, very, very active at sweeping the streets, cleaning the handrails, picking up trash, gardening. Like, they were just very, very active, and you can tell. And it wasn't just like, oh, going to make the donuts, like, gotta go sweep the streets. No, like, they did it with enthusiasm, or I think of, even my father. He's getting up there, 64, 65, and the whole family, and including myself, sometimes I'm like, man, you need to retire. Like, you need to just, like, Like, stop working. Like, you work every single day. Still, guys, 65 years old, works every single day, 8 a.m. to, 8 p.m. typically, sometimes later on the weekends. My family owned pizza restaurants in Texas. And it finally, I finally understood maybe about 2-3 years ago. And it's like, if he retired, where would his meaning be? Like, yeah, he's got a great family, big family, and the kids, and that's a part of it.
Mhm.
But I mean, the restaurants have been his life for 40 years. 40 years. Like there's a sense of purpose and meaning behind that, And so now, fortunately, we've gotten to the place where he works, 3-4, he goes in, makes the dough 3-4 hours, gets that little feel and vibe, and he gets to go home. And that's good. But it's like, I really saw that. And I read an article that it said that people that retire early, because it's like we have this fantasy, and it's like, I'm gonna go sit by the beach and have umbrellas and my little cocktails and all this stuff.
Right.
You won't last 3 days. You go batshit insane. You'll get so bored. You will. The article concluded that people that retired early died earlier too, because they lost their passion. And I'm sorry to go ahead.
No. That was perfect, man. I think that's a great example, because the point that I think you're making is as above, so below, and
Yeah.
so you can have meaning inside the workplace, which is fantastic, but you also need to have personal meaning, and where an organization does a really good job is when they can align those two, right? Because
Totally.
you have intrinsic and extrinsic meaning or motivation, right? And so, like, anytime we can tap into someone's intrinsic meaning, that's fantastic. There was actually a good 2013 study published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization where they took over 2,000 employees. And maybe before I start this, would you agree that most people want to help fight cancer?
Of course.
That's something that we
I would
all are just
agree, I
like,
would agree that most people would. Yes.
okay. So what this group did was they took all these employees, they were Amazon employees, and they had even pay structure, task requirements, and working conditions. They were all identical. And they brought them in, and for the meaning group, they asked them to help identify cancer spots or tumor cells. Now, they gave the exact same task to a group that was zero context. They just said, hey, we're looking to identify objects of interest. We're not going to tell you what they are. Go ahead and do that, bring them back. And then they had a third group, which they called the shredded group, where they didn't give them any context, and they told them that their work was going to be discarded immediately upon submission. Well, surprise, surprise. The group that you told was screening for cancer was significantly more productive. And this is the piece to me that like really solidified why a company should be looking at this, because it's like, okay, productivity, that's fantastic. But what they found was that the people who were in the low meaning or shredded context had decreased quality of work, and it cost the company an additional 6 cents per hour for these employees to spend on that task, because the quality of work was lower, they were working
Wow.
slower. Yeah, man. And
And
so
and that's how you spark someone's interest too, is tying a dollar amount to that too.
if it don't make
You know?
dollars, it don't make sense.
Yeah, no money, no honey.
So yeah, that to me is one of the ones where I feel like if you're not doing that, then that's the foundation, right? If everybody in the organization can't get on board with what your why is, the meaning that we're all here for, you've lost the war. You didn't lose a battle, you lost the war.
Simon Sinek, start with the why.
Exactly. So again, dude, if you
We
know the way
should we
broadly,
should
you will see it in all things.
right. We should link that Simon Sinek video in the show notes.
Perfect. Well, let's talk about how we've done that at Bake Bros, because this is something that we've intentionally, in large part, to Dell, have worked to message, because it's always been there. But I don't know if we've always, openly messaged it the correct way until we watched that Simon Sinek video. And then it was like, oh, I get what it is now. So you want to kind of talk about that process and how we've instilled that meaning in Bake Bros?
How do we find the meaning within Bake Bros and get that as a part of the culture through the rest of the team? How do we make somebody in distribution that's delivering the orders feel like they're putting a man on the moon? In other words,
Exactly.
right?
Like how did we instill that feeling, and what was it that we used to instill that across the organization? Because you go down, and ask any of our employees why we're doing what we're doing, they're going to give you the same exact answer every single time.
What is the why? Why are we doing this? I grew up in an abusive household. My mom, she did drugs. God bless her soul. She's nice and healthy now, fortunately. But it was just shitty growing up. I didn't want to be around that. I didn't. I ended up wrestling because I didn't want to be at home. I wanted to be away from my stepdad. Dude, it's because of being in an abusive house, and I didn't want to be there. Period. I don't want other people to have to suffer from that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like cannabis helped me get away from that. I was fortunate enough to have better role models in my life that helped me not see it as really this bad gateway drug that it's so made out to be. And for Thomas, I mean his mother passed away from a pharmaceutical overdose. I mean, he was going to school to be a doctor when I approached him, about getting into this, and literally one of the things he said to me was, I want to help people. You can help people with cannabis.
That's it right there.
You can help a lot of people with cannabis. Let's do this. And he started seeing it firsthand himself, just like I did. When I saw it firsthand, man, it was game over. When I saw it help my wrestling coach, dude, it was game over. I was like, what?
Yes.
This actually works like that? Like, I was using this to get away from my house and like get away from the mental bullshit, and here's this guy that's an idol to me, and like he's using cannabis to help with the pain that he has, and it's like, where can I go to learn about this?
Well, so you and oftentimes when we're young and we're using cannabis, we trivialize our experience. But you, just right now, what you were saying, just like your coach, we're using cannabis to find relief from something.
Right.
Yours was the psychological storm that was happening in your mind because of the chaos that was happening in your home, right? And this provided a healthier outlet to gain a new perspective, and refocus on other things. Your coach did the same thing with pain. And, for Thomas, it was, and my story is very similar. I had an uncle who took his life, and I got into cannabis just like Thomas, because it's like, this is another way to help people. And this isn't being talked about. And, in every single one of our end of month meetings, what do we talk about? We talked about the patients that we're helping. We talk about how important our patients are. And that is something that it's like top down, right? Like it's our why, it's our people's why. We've had people who've resonated with that. That's why we educate. It's just, it has permeated through our entire culture because of the example that you and Thomas set, right? And the stories, the narratives that you guys were able to convey to us that made us go, yeah, that's what I'm about. I'm ride or die.
And it's like, if because we'll do surveys, and we'll do we'll ask by hand in the end of month meeting sometimes, like, how many people, show of hands, have got into this industry because they wanted, or they wanted to, or knew somebody that wanted to transition from pharmaceuticals. Big hand raise, and it's like, that's what we have been able to narrow down as the real culprit. Okay. Like, I mean, my mom using prescriptions and then getting into, harder drugs. My stepdad being abusive because of alcohol, and I'm because of mixtures with pharmaceutical, drugs. Like, it oftentimes leads back down to that, again, Thomas's mother passing away from a pharmaceutical overdose. Right. And it's like, I mean, that's the common enemy. It is. And with that being said, I've said this in the past, we're not saying like, let's go pitchfork outside the factories, like, that's not for, like, anybody who's had surgery, you wouldn't be here right now if it weren't for pharmaceuticals. It's likely that you wouldn't be here, because we need antibiotics. We need certain pharmaceuticals. They do work. Work, but it's that
we're just advocating for a different approach.
Correct.
It's just a different approach.
To make that clear.
Absolutely, man. Well, I think that we've instilled a lot of meaning in our audience.
Yeah.
I think it's time to transition onto my personal favorite, which is autonomy.
Freedom.
So what's what I love about this one is that, this country was founded on the idea of freedom, right? But it was also born during the Industrial Revolution, where the way that humans worked radically changed, and it nobody really knew what to do, right? And so there was a whole system of values and ethics about the way people worked, about the way you should treat people, that it was just a product of the time, and that has transitioned into this part of our culture, and I think we're starting to see a transition away from this. But it's the idea that everything needs to be top down. Executives give orders to managers, who in turn relay those to other employees, and there's no questioning. This is just the way things go. A good employee is somebody who works hard and doesn't ask a lot of questions and does what they're told. Now, where we've and that has led us to where we are today, but it hasn't necessarily maybe been the best way, right? And it definitely, we know for a fact, hasn't been the best for our psychological health, right? I mean, we're seeing rates of anxiety and depression skyrocketing for a variety of reasons, but when you survey people, workplace dissatisfaction is pretty high on the list. And so one of the things that we can do is we can tap into this, what's called self-determination theory. And this is something that Netflix, again, Patty McCord's book, Powerful, this is what this is about. And it's that humans intrinsically, once they've bought into your meaning, they're sold on the company, they want to do a good job for you. They just do. Like, nobody wants, like, it's rare that people just want to suck. You know what I mean? And so it's tapping into that, because what happens when you do this top-down approach is you end up stripping the self-motivation or the autonomy of an individual. And come on, if I try to impose limitations on you right now by telling you exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, how fun is that for you? How enjoyable is that experience?
Yeah, not very creative.
Not very creative. So there's this idea that you want to, as an employer or as a manager, you want your employees to feel autonomous, right? And you want them to be satisfied and feel like they had input into their work, as opposed to just, I'm working for rewards, or, to avoid punishment, or to get out of feeling guilty about something. Like that's a recipe for crappy work.
That's a two-part system though. So and a two-way highway. Okay, and let me explain that, because I've read the Patty McCord Powerful book, and by golly, it is a phenomenal book, man. And I if anybody's interested in culture, you can YouTube, or actually we'll put it in the show notes. You can get the culture deck for Netflix. It's available. It's like 200 slides or something nuts like that too, but it's available, and it's really cool if you want to learn some of the culture of Netflix and then go further with the book. Now, I love that philosophy. I love the idea of that. I like that a lot. And would you agree that is partially how it is at Bake Bros?
Yeah. We've taken huge strides into making sure that's something that we're thinking about, for sure.
Right. And we're testing it here and we're testing it there. And one of the struggles that we have with that, though, is because it's how many times can the employee derail from the main objective or goals, or make the same mistake, to where it's like, hey, we're trying to give you autonomy. We're trying to give you this freedom to create, this freedom to be, but you keep making the same mistakes. I only bring that up because it's like, man, Patty McCord's book is awesome, and I want to be like that. But then doing it firsthand as a business owner with 30 plus employees, it can be kind of difficult.
Well, I think there's two things here. I mean, there's nothing that says in this self-determination theory or the idea of autonomy support that you can't, that there should be no repercussions for employees. Like that, first of all, that's not even worth talking about, because that's just insane, right? Like we kind of talked about earlier, but there has to be feedback along the way, right? You need to constantly, and that's part of autonomy support is, hey, you know what? You took a shot on this, and it didn't work, and this is the next steps we need to do. What seems like a good way to move forward, right? It's this collaborative process. It's looking at the leader and the employee as working together, instead of, I'm the leader, you're the employee, you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do, and that's the end of the story. So right. there's the discipline is not stripped out of this. It's just reframed. I mean, it's a lot like child rearing. I mean, it is, right? Like we talked about this the last episode. If I spank you and tell you you're a bad kid, now go to your room, which is what you're doing when you're telling somebody, you screwed this up. I'm super unhappy. This is what's happening going forward. Okay, well, I don't really like you very much now. And I don't really want to do that much. As opposed to, hey, what's going on here? Let's have a conversation. Let's come up with some solutions. And I want to hear your thoughts on A, what happened, how we can improve, and how this isn't going to happen again. And let's work towards that goal, right? So, I mean, the study that looked at this was published in 2015 in the International Journal of Psychology, and they took 266 school teachers in China, which is a culture that typically focuses on controlled motivation, the kind of which we're talking about here. And what they did was they tried to increase this autonomy support, helping employees feel like they had some control over their work, and helping to increase their autonomous forms of motivation, which is like their sense of interest and value and volition, their motivation. And what they found was that they had huge increases in workplace satisfaction, individual well-being. And on the opposite end, the control group, the people who just stayed the same, who didn't have this autonomous support and motivation, they actually had increased related work stress and illness symptoms, which requires, that the company pays and they lose money on productivity and cost. So that's kind of my thinking. And I mean, what do you think about that? How do you think, where have we succeeded in rolling this out, and where have we not succeeded in rolling this out at Bake Bros?
Well, I feel before you really release the autonomy of work of a work environment, something that again, Thomas had brought into the picture was like a management system. There's Monday.com. There's all kinds of them. And we have a management system that we use to oversee and create dashboards of daily to-dos, weekly to-dos, what's overdue.
Mm-hmm.
You can build projects for campaigns, and this kind of keeps everybody cohesive and congruent in terms of communication, so that things aren't lost within email and multiple phone calls and unnecessary meetings. So I believe we've done a good job, and ever evolving, but a good job at allowing autonomy. And the reason that's been doable is because I give a lot of contribution to the management program that we have, right? And the processes within there, like we have certain filing for each task, in progress, overdue, needs to be produced, with designer, awaiting this review, awaiting so-and-so's approval, things like that. That allows it just allows simplification of the communication,
Right.
to be honest.
Well, so you know what? Let's take this as a case study, because I think this is a great example. First, you can't just start from scratch, right? Like you allude to, there's some structure that needs to be in place in order for you to start putting things on, right? Allowing employees to be autonomous. So this management platform is one of them. But the beautiful thing about what you're describing here is that we actually did have an employee who came to us and said, "Hey, I think there's a better way for this to work for our department.
Right.
And here's how I think it should work." And what did he do? He worked with Thomas, our CEO. They talked about it. Thomas said, "Hey, how would this best work?" He questioned him, right? "Hey, I don't know if that's the best way to do this. What if we did it this way?" "Oh, actually, that's a pretty good idea too." And they worked collaboratively to create that structure. And now that's the structure we've used for the last 6 months. And
Right.
it works really well. And
Right.
and the environment in Bake Bros is, if something's not working well, come talk to us. We'll have a conversation about it, and we'll implement what works, and not implement what doesn't.
That's the goal, man.
It's beautiful, because as an employee, you have a voice.
That's all we want, is for everybody to feel heard and voiced too. I have employees hit me up, this all the time, and I'm glad they do. I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm glad that they feel comfortable enough to reach out to myself and Thomas the way that they do.
Yeah, man. I hope that everybody listening to this appreciates that, because as an employee, that relieves a lot of stress and a lot of angst, and I know that's hard. As a parent, I know that's hard.
Yeah.
Well, the last one, and I think this is the one that has moved the needle for us in unseen ways, because where it takes place, which is your mind, and that's mindfulness. And I think this is something that a lot of small businesses just aren't privy to, but it is something that we've seen incorporated into companies like Google, right? Where they have dedicated mindful places for their employees and encourage them to engage in mindful activities. And there's a reason for it, man. I mean, mindfulness is one of the biggest things in health and wellness right now.
And it's getting so overused to mindfulness. It just is. But as explained in your article, mindfulness is best described as having open, receptive attention to the present moment with an emphasis on non-judgmental and acceptance. Right. So what does that mean? Let's break that down. Right. Having an open, receptive attention to the present moment, to what's going on right now, day by day, hour by hour. You know, if I have a meeting, okay, that I'm at with the leadership team, I can't be on my laptop hammering away on emails or the management system. I can't be on iMessage, or I have to be mindful and have receptive attention in that meeting, in that present moment, and also to further break down, with an emphasis on non-judgmental and acceptance, right? So like what are the communications that are happening right now? What's happening during this meeting? I need to see the other person's point of view in a non-judgmental way, okay? And try and understand where they're coming from, and then debate it, right? We have to. It's the only way.
So it's allowing the individual to be more aware of their emotions, impulses, needs, external excitements and pressures, which then allows them to make a reflective or responsive choice rather than a reactive choice. Right? Because, you take like you just said, feedback or debate. So often we get caught in the weeds with a debate or feedback because it doesn't go the way we planned. The person doesn't respond the way we want them to respond. Or something goes wrong. We have this emotional response, and then we react to that. And in that reaction, we are not being mindful. And you just increase the likelihood that you're going to do something that you're going to later do, or say something that you will later regret. Or maybe you don't regret it, but it's not as productive as it could have been. Right. And the science of that is crystal clear. When you're reacting like that, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical and rational part of your brain, is coming offline, and your amygdala is becoming overactive, which is like the fear producing center, the anxiety, the fight or flight. And so the choices that we make under those conditions they're not the best. And within an organization, when the stakes are high and, successes are being had or mistakes are being made, it's really important to be reflective and not reactive, because you will do something that is not optimal. And we already talked about this business, this industry is fast paced. We can't afford to make a whole lot of, errors.
Yes. And this is something, I think you said it in the beginning, that we are very mindful of. At Bake Bros, I would say it's one of the most too, because we care about the well-being of everybody that's on the team. It's no secret that if somebody is not in a good state, or at least a good mind state, they're not going to be performing their best. And it's difficult, but it's there. And so some of the things that we've done at Bake Bros, and that you can do too, whether you have a team of 2 or a team of 22, it doesn't matter. One thing that we've done is we have a Mindful Friday. So every Friday at 7:30 a.m. Right now we get on a Google Hangouts call, and we've been going down the lessons, the meditation theories and lessons that are on the Waking Up app from Sam Harris. We have no affiliation with his podcast or anything. We just love his work. But we go through the lessons. I think we're doing the basic learning lessons, and we're on number 27, and they're anywhere from a 8 to 12 minute meditation. And we will sit there as a team. There's typically anywhere from 8 to 12 of us on the call, and we do these meditations. I know that they also do group meditations at the warehouse. It's not mandatory. It's totally optional. We encourage it. I know that some of our department leads will do stretches in the parking lot or on the deck. they'll run little mobility stretches, kind of work the shoulders out, work the hips out. We're standing all day. Some of us are sitting, but that can be very mindful as well, like being mindful of your body, because your body's just important as your mind. And
Absolutely.
those are just easy tactics that you can do.
So uh, all of those, I mean, I've participated in, and I can tell you that it definitely brings a more cohesive group, and it translates to more mindful interactions amongst employees. If for nothing else, the fact that everybody's aware that this company is trying to be mindful in their interactions, which inherently makes you want to be more mindful. And so, from the outside, I can imagine a business leader or a leader of a team going, yeah, that's fantastic, but I don't have time for this, or this is a huge,
Right.
it's something people should be doing on their own time,
Right.
etc. And there was a huge 2019 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and it was a systematic review, which means they look at all the available research, and then a meta-analysis where they take the results of all those and combine them to see if the results hold up across studies. And so they looked at 89 different studies with over 25,000 participants. And what they found was that mindfulness was associated with autonomous forms of motivation. That should be familiar because we just talked about autonomy, right? Especially
Right.
autonomous, trying to create autonomous motivation, which is that intrinsic meaning. So it all funnels into each other. But one of the things that they found on the results side was that it positively affected the job performance and satisfaction. You had improved well-being, improved performance, work engagement, memory function, and reduced substance use, all because of the effects induced by mindfulness in terms of autonomous motivation. And it also led to a reduction in the amount of sick time and work-related stress that people experienced. So again, it's just all of these
Sounds
things,
to me like a big bucket of wins.
a big bucket of wins in an industry that is consistently losing. And that's the big picture right there, that we have these high turnover rates. We have these companies that are experiencing these things. And if you implement them like we've done at Bake Bros, you will see improvements. It's backed by the research. It's backed by our anecdotal experience. How you do that is, the art of this whole piece, but we've laid down the science, and it's not a secret.
Dude, fantastic talking with you as always, man. Let's get into the Q&A session. I've got a couple questions. Let's see. How did you find your ideal balance with cannabis?
Mistakes.
Mistakes. Yeah, I had a oh my god. Trial and error, so don't touch a hot stove twice.
Yeah.
I'm speaking
One thing I would
experience.
add to that, and this is, I think you learned this lesson better than I have learned this lesson, but taking time off and reevaluating the relationship, right?
Yeah.
That's something we've
Yeah.
talked about. And every time you do that, you kind of get a fresh perspective. The hard part is the discipline on implementing it, which is where I think you've done better than I.
And hey, maybe we'll October is nearing, my friend. October is nearing. Maybe we'll start a little group challenge on Facebook or Instagram, and anybody that wants to participate can participate. But maybe we'll talk about that later. How did I find my ideal balance with cannabis? Largely due to what Derek had just shared is trial and error, and time off, time away from it. Because and you know what, there's actually a great piece on our website. If you click the bakebros.com, go to the menu, go to doses of education, go to tolerance. It's a great write-up on cannabis and tolerance, and so understanding tolerance and how THC and other cannabinoids respond with the receptors, that can be insightful, and that can give you a lot of food for thought. But that's where I would first point you is towards the cannabis intolerance and applying that mindfulness, right, on how things make you feel. Right? Does the joint makes me feel this way? 2 hits from a joint makes me feel this way. A dab makes you feel this way. An edible makes me feel this way. A THC drink makes me feel this way versus a THC cookie. So like these are all little subtle variables that you need to keep track of. It does take time, right? You can't drink the THC syrup in a soda water just to wash down the cookie that you ate because you don't know which one's doing what. You need to have proper and ample time in between. I would recommend at least a day in between if you're new to cannabis. That way you can really try and hone in on what does what for your type. So the second question is, what types of psychedelics are there? Well, there's a lot.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
Typically you can break down, you can break down. So let me start this way. Psychedelics is a catch-all term for substances that alter perception and reveal the mind, right? But typically we think about it in at least the research literature as classic and non-classic psychedelics. Classic psychedelics are any psychedelics that bind to the serotonin 2A receptor. So compounds that fall into this category are DMT, LSD, psilocybin from magic mushrooms, and mescaline, which comes from peyote and San Pedro cactus. Now, those are the classic psychedelics. Those are the ones that have the most research done. And those are the ones that, like, when you see all these benefits through research studies, those are the ones they're looking at. Now, non-classic psychedelics, there is a laundry list of these compounds. Nadeem, I believe you have a book called The Food of the Gods, which was written by Albert Hoffman and
Yes.
Richard Evan Schultes, which breaks down most of the psychoactive plants that we know of on the earth. But I'll just do a quick highlight of some of the other ones. The next biggest one is probably MDMA, which is a mix of a classic psychedelics like mescaline and an amphetamine. So it's kind of like this hybrid. So it doesn't produce the same altered state of consciousness as a classic psychedelic, which is why it doesn't make it into that category. Next on the list, you have dissociatives, which are like ketamine. That's probably the most common one, so we'll just leave it there. But these are things that produce a dissociative state that can have psychedelic-like qualities, but they are a different class of compounds. You have ibogaine, or the plant iboga, which again is a totally different compound. It binds to lots of different receptors. It's pretty complicated. That's used a lot for addiction. And then the last one that I think is worth mentioning here is salvia, which produces these... it binds to certain opioid receptors, but it produces effects very, very similar to DMT. And you can read reports on all of these. There's been research on each of these compounds, so there's a well-established literature there. But those are the different types of psychedelic compounds that are out there.
And if you want to really go in depth on learning more, if you want to go down a rabbit hole of your own, you can go to Arrowwood. Arrowwood is a good resource, and we'll link that in the show notes. You can find everything from. Well, I'll just let you check it out. How about that, guys? This has been a great another fun episode. Just great talking with you, Derek, and I hope that the audience, all of you listening, got some valuable insight on where the cannabis culture is right now within the workplace. How you can, if you're involved in the cannabis workplace, how you can improve it. We went off three tips, right? So the valuable places that we can all improve, whether it be cannabis culture or outside of it, guys. It's just meaning, autonomy, and mindfulness, right? And please leave a rating and review. It helps us so much. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. Quick disclaimer. The Know Your Dose podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Let's be real. None of us are doctors. Our content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or public health advice. Please be smart and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Seriously, never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. That would just be insane.